Tonight, I wanted to start a new series where I dive into the lore and world of The Witcher and get to read some bits from the books. If you've seen any of my Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones videos, you'll know it's something I really enjoy doing. Over on Patreon, you all voted for The Witcher, and I've been having a blast replaying the games since they announced The Witcher 4. So in this video, I've tried to do an introduction to the world, its main characters, magic, creatures, politics, and main themes. It's set up in a way where, hopefully, even those of you who are brand new to it will be able to digest it and warm up to this amazing series without being too over. And after the law, I'll read one of the most iconic stories from the collection that I think is a perfect intro for Geralt of Rivia. Before we get into it, I wanted to take a moment to shout out a fellow creator whose videos I really enjoy. If you've ever come across my Dungeons & Dragons themed videos and liked that sort of thing, or enjoy a critical role style of storytelling, I really recommend you check out The Kingdom Sleeps, a D&D podcast for relaxation. I'll leave a link to their channel in the description, so please stop by their tavern and show some love. And if you'd like a way to support this channel, consider checking out my Patreon. But now, it's time to curl up, sharpen your silver sword, and let's get started with the adventure. Welcome to the continent. It's a world of powerful kingdoms, ancient ruins, and wild frontiers, with a history written in blood and haunted by the supernatural. Across this land, humans, elves, dwarves, and other races fight for survival. And those deemed different are usually misunderstood or feared. And it's amazing just how dark it can get with the folklore and inspirations, which we'll get to in a bit. Now, the witches are mutated monster hunters, trained to deal with the uncanny. They use alchemy, 2 swords of silver and steel, and some beginner magic to fight the creatures that prowl the darkness. The way most people see it,
witches are outcasts, freaks, tolerated only when there's a threat of monsters. Geralt of Rivia is one of the last remaining witches. He spent his life wandering the continent, taking on thankless contracts, trying to survive, and usually finding himself in the middle of events that shape the fate of the world itself.
To anyone who's played the games, or is even a bit familiar with this universe, you'll know that the world of The Witcher is as much about the monsters lurking in the wild as it is about the ones that dwell in the hearts of men. Every choice has a consequence, and nothing is ever as black and white as you'd think. It's one of the reasons I love this series so much, and I hope by the end of this little law dive you will as well. The continent's history starts around 1,500 years ago, with an apocalyptic event called the Conjunction of the Spheres. This was a collision on a cosmic level, where it merged a bunch of parallel dimensions. And this ended up unleashing a lot of unnatural or otherworldly creatures onto the continent. Things like ghouls, gravers, and vampires, to name just a few. Elven lore says that humans, whose own world had been destroyed, also arrived during the conjunction. It was through the conjunction, and in the aftermath, that humans first harnessed the power of primordial chaos or magic, as it's better known, giving rise to the first human mages. But something worth mentioning is that humans wrongly believe that this chaos or magic was a result of the conjunction of the spheres. This is based on their belief that this world they live in is the very same one they evolved in, rather than having had a previous world which was destroyed. So before human arrival, the continent was inhabited by elder races, like gnomes, dwarves, and elves. But even the elves weren't native to the continent, actually. They'd arrived about a millennium earlier than the humans. In their white ships and established civilizations, and coexisted with other non-human species. The sudden barrage of humans driven by expansionist ambitions and this new mastery over magic led to a series of conflicts, as you can imagine. The elder races couldn't withstand the relentless human onslaught and were eventually marginalized, had their cultures eroded and their populations confined to remote regions or generally poor and undesirable places within human settlements. During the time of the Witcher series, mages are really deeply involved in politics and are as much an organization as they are practitioners of magic. At first, there was the Brotherhood of Sorcerers, which regulated and oversaw the use of magic and tried to keep dark practices like demonology and necromancy from being widely practiced. And for magers who broke the rules, they'd hand out punishments and sentences, like being shackled with dimeritium for up to multiple centuries, which is a type of rare metal that inhibits spellcasting. Magers lived way longer than your regular human, and even had spells and potions to slow or halt the aging process. Now, as humanity expanded, so did the proliferation of monsters, those creatures that appeared during the conjunction. And these monsters threatened their settlements. So to combat these dangers, powerful mages conducted some messed up and dark experiments in Castle Risberg to create mutant, magic-wielding warriors through a grueling process involving alchemical potions, mutagens, and intense training. Young boys were transformed into something else. A lot of kids died in the process during the trials. And finally, the first Witcher was created. But these experiments were actually seen as a failure. The witches created were called that because they were seen as charlatans, capable only of mere witchery. They could only use some simple magic known as signs. A couple of examples are signs like Axii and Ard. Axii is a kind of hypnotic spell that witches use to calm or hex people or even animals. Ard is a telekinetic blast that can knock down or push away enemies and objects. There's a few more like Igni, Quinn, and Erden. Igni is a fire sign, Quinn is a shield sign, and Yrden is a kind of trap sign. But getting back to it, the witches were banished from the castle. But a few magers saw more potential and took them to another castle to continue the experiments. Eventually, the witches would split up into 6 different schools or groups and become the professional monster hunters we know them as. In the schools, young witches would train and go through a very painful series of trials. The major one being the trial of grasses before they left their respective schools to complete their path and return for the winter. The boys' physical features would change as well during their trials and training. I'm going to read a short excerpt from the Blood of Elves book. to just how brutal these rituals were. For 2 days, more did symptoms not subside. The child's skin, hitherto drenched in sweat, grew dry and hot. The pulse ceased to be full and firm, albeit remaining of average strength, slow rather than fast. No more did he wake, nor did he scream. Finally came the 7th day. The male awoke and opened his eyes, and his eyes were those of a viper. Gerald himself is a member of the School of the Wolf. The other schools are also named after animals like the cat, the viper, griffin, manticore, and so on. But back to the majors. So this brotherhood of sorcerers lasted a while, until a coup led by a mage called Philippa Eilhart led to the magical barrier around the island they lived on being taken down, and a slaughter between the mages, a non-human rebel group called the Scoia'tael, and human soldiers. The brotherhood was dissolved and replaced by the Lodge of Sorcerers. The lodge was made up of only female majors, and the sorceresses saw men as incapable of handling matters related to magic and the governance of it. Philippa Eilhart, the de facto leader of this new guild, said, "An utterly new, secret organization should be founded which will exclusively serve matters of magic, which will do everything to prevent a cataclysm. For if magic were to perish, our world would perish with it." Another one of the initial members of the lodge is Triss Merigold, an important character in the world of The Witcher and in Geralt's story. And then, of course, there's Yennefer of Vengerberg, who joined later, although unwillingly. This is because she and the lodge didn't exactly see eye to eye, especially when it came to Ciri, who you can think of as Gerald and Inniva's adopted daughter for now. Ciri is easily the most interesting and probably the most important character in the entire series. And not to go on a tangent, but knowing she's the main character in the next Witcher game is pretty much what prompted me to make this video, since I'm super excited about that. But anyways, before we go into more detail about Ciri, let's just talk a bit about the state of the continent and the political powers at play. Since they're a huge part of the book series and the games, the continent is divided into several regions, with the northern kingdoms and the Nilfgaardian Empire being the most important ones. The northern kingdoms are made up of realms like Temeria, Redania, Cadwin, and Aedan. They're usually caught up in political intrigue, alliances, and wars. But to the south lies the Nilfgaardian Empire. It's an exceptionally powerful realm, known for its military prowess and efficiency. Under the rule of Emperor Emir var Emirs, Nilfgaard has launched a bunch of invasions into the northern territories, essentially trying to bring the entire continent under its control. The political back and forth could warrant its own several videos, so I'll spare us the deeper details for now. But it's still worth knowing the bigger picture when you're trying to wrap your head around this world and the cultures. The humans aren't the only ones with political agendas, though. Remember the elder races we talked about and their oppression at the hands of the humans? Well, some of them created their own faction called the Scoia'tael that I mentioned briefly earlier. These non-human guerrilla fighters emerged in response to the systemic discrimination by human societies in the northern kingdoms. Many non-humans saw the Scoia'tael as a means to resist and reclaim their dignity. They operate in commando units and engage in acts of sabotage, ambushes, and raids, mostly targeting human settlements and supply lines. Their tactics have led to their classification as both freedom fighters and terrorists, depending on perspective, I guess. And perspective is a massive part of the story. There's this big focus on Geralt being a neutral party, or at least the impression of it. In a short story that explains how he got the nickname, the Butcher of Blaviken, he says this: "Evil is evil. Lesser, greater, middling. It's all the same. Proportions are negotiated, boundaries blurred. I'm not a pious hermit. I haven't done only good in my life. But if I'm to choose between one evil and another, then I prefer not to choose at all." But this couldn't be further from the truth, really. Geralt, for all the non-humanity the witches are treated with, is a very humanized character. Whether it's the games or the books, he's always caught between sides and having to choose. When it comes to the Scoia'tael and the humans, the politics between the North and South, or even the monsters he hunts, he's always discovering that it's nearly impossible to be impartial in a morally gray world. One of the things that makes Geralt so human is his relationship to Ciri. So let's talk about her. Cirilla Fiona Ellen Rhiannon, or just Ciri, was born to Princess Pavetta and the Nilfgaardian Emperor Emhyr Emrys, who was going by the alias Dunny at the time. She's also the granddaughter of Queen Calanthe of Cintra. So she's really a princess through and through. But her lineage is not just noble, it's also prophetic. You see, Ciri is a child of the Elder Blood. Without overwhelming you with detail, essentially, she descends from the line of a really powerful elven sorceress and mage called Laura Doran, who fell in love with a human mage after the conjunction of spheres. This Elder Blood endows her with extraordinary abilities, like the power to traverse time and space. Naturally, this makes her a very sought-after individual by many of the factions and supernatural forces across the continent. In the world of The Witcher, there's an ancient custom which basically fills in as a way for destiny to intervene, called the Law of Surprise. It's a strange tradition where someone saves another person's life and asks for a reward. But instead of gold or land, the reward is something the person doesn't yet know they have, something that will surprise them. This custom is the reason Geralt becomes tied to Ciri. To understand how Ciri becomes part of Geralt's life, we have to go back to her parents, Pavetta, the princess of Cintra, and Donny, a man cursed to look like a hedgehog during the day. Years before Ciri was born, Donny saved the life of Pavetta's father, King Regnet. As a reward, Donny invoked the Law of Surprise. Here's where it gets interesting. Pavetta was to be married, and she had a whole lineup of suitors. Donny presented himself and invoked the Law of Surprise from when he'd saved the king. saying that Princess Pavetta was his since before her birth. Now obviously, her mother, Queen Calanthe, didn't want her daughter marrying some cursed stranger. But Pavetta loved Dunny, and they'd actually started seeing each other secretly about a year earlier. And so, during a royal feast, she revealed her magical abilities to protect him from her mother's wrath. In the chaos, Geralt, who was invited to the feast as a guest, helped resolve the situation and protect Danny, essentially saving his life. Danny's curse was lifted when Pavetta defended him, and the couple was allowed to marry. In his gratitude, Danny offered Geralt a reward of his choice. Geralt, being Geralt, invoked the law of surprise as a joke, not thinking much of it. But there was a twist. Pavetta was already pregnant with Ciri, though no one knew it at the time. By invoking the law of surprise, Geralt unknowingly tied himself to their unborn child, who would later become his child of destiny. Fast forward a few years, and tragedy strikes. The Nilfgaardian Empire invades the kingdom of Sintra, leaving Queen Calanthe to defend her people. Ciri, now a young girl and heir to the throne, is caught in the chaos. Calanthe tries to keep her hidden and safe, even as her kingdom falls. At this point, Geralt is wandering the continent, doing what witches do. He had originally refused to claim Ciri as his child of destiny after invoking the law of surprise, even though he'd encountered her multiple times throughout her childhood by chance. But fate doesn't care about what he wants. He runs into Ciri during her escape and realizes that this is the child bound to him by destiny. So finally, he accepts it and takes her to Kaer Morhen, the fortress of the witchers. He and the rest of the witches don't really know what to do, so they just train her as a witcher.
Like them.
She does the same drills and training they'd go through. And they even give her some special herbs that accelerate the physical progression as a witcher. And Geralt, who had always seen himself as a sort of lone wolf, becomes her adoptive father, essentially. He truly comes to see her as his daughter, and he'll go to any lengths to keep her safe. Throughout her life and journey, she also meets characters like Triss and Yennefer, who play super important roles in her development and training as well. Ciri's story is a long one, and at some point it splits between the books and the game canon, so that would be a whole separate topic I could explore. But now let's shift gears to talk about the folklore and some of the monsters that Geralt comes up against, since that's easily one of the coolest aspects. What I really like about the creatures in The Witcher is they feel so unique. They're not just there as fodder or for killing. They're more usually than not living manifestations of things like fear, tragedy, secrets, and clearly deeply inspired by Slavic folk tales and old beliefs. Every time Geralt encounters them, it feels like actually stepping into some forgotten myth. And contracts that look like a pretty basic monster killing on the surface end up revealing something about the townsfolk and their history. Take the Leshen, for example. I'm going to read some of the official descriptions and law, since nothing I say could describe them better. At the heart of the forest lies a secret. In a place born of darkness and primeval nature resides a mighty and terrifying guardian. Immune to human steel, it is believed the Leshen is nature's way of protecting the forest and the animals that live within it from the threat humans started to pose upon their ravaging expansion deeper into the lands. In some areas of the world, these creatures form the center of local cults. Peasants living near their woods make offerings to them, usually of hares and birds, though human blood is not unheard of. This fact has given rise to many legends about helpful Leshens chasing game towards hunters, helping lost travelers find their way in the forest, or saving them from bandits. Sadly, these tales do not have an ounce of truth in them. Leshens see men only as sources of energy on which to feed. They will drain the life force of those who live nearby until only limpid husks remain. In terms of how they look, it's really quite scary. They're these really tall, humanoid-looking things with tree-like limbs. Their head is that of a deer skull with big antlers. And in pagan Slavic mythology, a Leshy is a shape-shifting deity of the forest, typically associated with evil. Another monster is the Striga, a human woman that's transformed into a hulking monster by a curse. In old Polish legends, a Striga is a female demon that's a bit vampiric in nature. And actually, the roots of it go back to Rome and Greece, but that's beyond the scope of this. In The Witcher, though, based on the main concrete example we have, it seems like Strigas are created when a child is cursed in the womb, transforming them into feral creatures. Geralt's battle with the Striga is easily one of his most famous encounters. The Striga, revealed to be Princess Ada, was cursed due to her father's incestuous relationship with her mother, who she was named after. There's a quest item, a journal belonging to a man called Ostrates, who was apparently in love with Ada, which gives us some insight into how exactly she was cursed. It reads the following: I curse you, Voltist, and hope you rot amidst worms in hell. I curse your incestuous deeds. Your sister Ada deserved better. I implore destiny to render the child born of your lechery as monstrous as you. If the witch spoke truly, you will soon taste my vengeance. I need only prepare the ingredients and utter the words thrice. Some say that not even the words are necessary, that hatred alone suffices. Know that my hatred is fierce. Breaking the curse requires Geralt to survive a night in the crypt where she dwells. When I get to the chapter readings in a bit, you'll find out the full story and how it ends. One of the most unsettling creatures, though, and honestly, probably my favorite, are the Crowns, also known as the Ladies of the Wood. Although I'm pretty sure these are just in the game. I don't remember reading about them at any point in the books. The Crowns are 3 witches who live in the swamp in Velen. And they look really repulsive, actually. But that just adds to their mystery and how interesting they are. The in-game bestiary entry for them reads, the isolated corners of our world harbor creatures older than humans, older than academies and majors, older even than elves and dwarves. The Krings of Crookback Bog, such creatures. No one knows their true names, nor what breed of monstrosity they in fact are. Common folk have given these three sisters the names Weavus, Brewis, and Wispus, and call the threesome the Ladies of the Wood, or simply the Good Ladies. The crowns act as the true sovereigns of Valen, whose inhabitants they help survive through harsh times in return for unquestioning obedience. They wield powerful magic, but one different from that of mages. They draw power from water and earth, and are bound to the land in which they live. The crowns can hear everything that happens in their woods, predict the future, twist the threads of human lives, and bring blessings as well as curses. Ciri and Geralt both end up crossing paths with them in The Witcher 3, and it's easily one of the most interesting quests I've played in any game ever. In speaking about a real-world inspiration, it would be the Barbara Yaga from Slavic mythology, and also the three weird sisters in Macbeth. But I'd go as far as to say that they also remind me a lot of the Norns from Norse mythology, and their whole role when it comes to weaving threads of fate, with them being the sort of ultimate power, stronger than gods, since even gods are subject to fate. But it's not just creepy European folklore. There's also a lot of influence from the classic fairy tales you can think of. There's a short story in The Last Wish that maybe I'll get to read in full next time, where the entire setup of it feels very Beauty and the Beast, but obviously with a typical Witcher twist. But anyways, in that story, there's a monster called a Bruxa, which is a kind of vampire. They're really intelligent, seductive, and extremely dangerous. They typically look like a young black-haired woman, but their true form is a big black bat with fangs and claws. They're super agile and have ultrasonic screams that incapacitate their enemies. I like their journal entry in the second Witcher game, since it shows how they're pretty distinct from your run-of-the-mill vampire. The bestiary reads, the Bruxa is a higher vampire that is a post-conjunction creature, an intruder in our world. She appears as a beautiful woman, but when she is hungry or attacking, she is terrifying. As a vampire, the Bruxa drinks blood. She often finds a victim to become her lover, and a constant supply of sustenance at the same time. The Bruxa finds the smell of garlic to be socially inconvenient at most, and she considers holy symbols to be interesting examples of handicraft. She endures the light of the sun well, but she prefers the darkness of the night. Now let's get to some reading. I struggled a bit to find a chapter that captures the essence of a Witcher, that really showcases everything I mentioned. But honestly, whether you've never heard of a Witcher before, or if you know the books and games end to end, nothing really symbolizes it, as well as the first short story in the Last Wish collection. It's got everything the discrimination witches face, their attempt at neutrality, how they prep for a fight, and the blurred lines between men and monsters.